the second hour of the Common Sense Show. Sure glad you're joining us. If you're joining us for the first time, just a lively first hour. We talked a good bit about the huge problems in the Middle East, what's happened in Paris last week. I see that just a couple of days ago, the authorities evacuated 2 stadiums in Germany after receiving information on another bomb threat. And so this whole scenario is going to be carrying on for some time to come. And the U.S. has brought much more into it now. Our NATO allies, we're going to have to respond. You're going to see troops in Syria. And the big question now comes in the refugees, the mass immigration of refugees out of Syria, getting into European countries, particularly Germany and several others. And President Obama has said he will bring 10,000 Syrians into this country. One of the bombers, we said earlier on the show, in the whole Paris scenario, had a passport, passed the security test, came right into Paris, and then participated in the devastation that take place there. So the question is the president right on to allow these Syrians to come in this country? Do we profile these Syrians? How do we protect ourselves? And governors across the U.S., a number of governors have threatened to stop accepting Syrian refugees following these attacks. And the legal implications are, what are the states' legal rights? Do the states have the authority to stop accepting Syrian refugees? We're going to talk with Eric Cedillo, who's an immigration attorney out of Dallas. His website is cedillolaw.com. You can find him on my website at jimbrownusa.com. He's an expert in immigration issues. I want to get his thoughts on this whole area. Hey, Eric, glad you welcomed us today on the Common Sense Show.
Thank you for having me on, Jim.
Eric, give us your thought on that. We have governors. Your governor over in Texas, this is absolutely no Syrians coming in. My governor in Louisiana, our adjoining state, has said the same thing. It's a question of what legal authority. Now, the governors certainly have certain authority to impose emergency provisions to protect their states. But as an immigration lawyer, do the governors have any ground to stand on when they talk about their limiting or refusing to accept Syrian prisoners into their, Syrian refugees into their states? What do you think about that?
Quite honestly, Jim, I don't think so. I think the president has the authority, of course, to implement the program. The Refugee Act of 1980 gives him the authority to operate. It kind of as the law with respect to that federal agency, and bringing people in is in the purview of the federal government, and of course is vested in the president. Now, the governors might have the ability, and I think some have talked about this. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is the agency responsible for running the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Now, those folks generally work with the state's Department of Health and Human Services. What the governors might be able to do is perhaps tell their own Department of Health and Human Services not to cooperate with the federal government. But in terms of denying or saying that the refugees cannot come into their state, I don't believe they have the legal ability to do that.
Now, I was listening, Eric, on many of the same stations which I broadcast. Rush Limbaugh is also a commentator on these stations, and he was quoting several law professors who said that there is some uncertainty because the Constitution would give the immigration rights to in terms of numbers and setting maybe educational requirements or something like that. Health requirements would be set in the federal level, but he thought as far as the actual importation, there might be some wiggle room in the Constitution. I guess that I would imagine we're going to see some lawsuits out of this whole thing, but you don't see any constitutional prohibition from your review of the law that would allow this to take place.
I really don't think so. There is no doubt that the president can bring or allow these refugees to resettle in the United States, and because of that, the United States are the United States, and he can bring them to the state that he really chooses, and the governors cannot stop him from doing that, prevent them from coming in. Of course, they can take action with respect to perhaps their ability to monitor, the individuals who come in, do some other things, not cooperate with the federal government in terms of the program. But I don't believe they have the legal authority to deny access to these refugees from coming into their states.
I wonder about registration. You know, we do allow some states require registration for non-citizens, or, of course, you've got the whole litany of criminal activity that vary from state to state in terms of what rights a criminal has. But what about registration, saying, okay, we can't prohibit you from coming in, but if you're going to move to Dallas, Texas, you've got to register that you are a new resident here. I think that has any constitutional foundation or not?
Well, I think the whole deal with that is I think the Supreme Court has kind of spoken. When you're invading the purview of the federal government with respect to refugee resettlement, immigration, those types of issues, you can, of course, attempt to implement the program. Problem is the federal government is going to go in and probably talk to the judiciary and say, hey, you need to stop this. This is within the purview of the federal government. So I don't think, they could do it. You've seen it done. But I don't think it will actually pass muster even with a federal judge at the very beginning at the district court level. So I don't think that that's going to be possible, for them to do that. Aside from doing some things, I think, like I say, the monitoring may be something within their purview, but actually preventing them from coming in or denying them access, I don't think that's going to be able to happen with respect to a legal standpoint.
Of course, I think what some governors are looking at, they're saying, look, if they make it so difficult and not cooperate at all with these federal agencies, let me say, look, this is just too much trouble. We're going to have one fight after the other, going to take us into court, and we just don't need all this. Let's go to a more friendly state. We're not talking about 100,000. We're talking about 10,000. And so as a consequence, some governors may be taking the attitude that by, in effect, putting up so much opposition, maybe that there will be a give in terms of those refugees coming in. That's kind of follows what you said there earlier, right?
I think that's the practicality behind what it is they're doing. And the president does have the ability. You got 50 states, and there's different places. They take into consideration a number of things in terms of where they're going to place them. A blowback from a governor saying we're not going to accept them can be one of those conditions where why make it a problem? Why try to put them in a state that isn't welcoming them? So, in terms of that working, it may have, to a certain extent.
Now, you're an immigration lawyer in a state that has one of the highest immigration rates in the country with your southern border. Has the law gotten pretty settled? Are there a number of immigration challenges? We hear about sanctuary cities. We hear so many issues that are taking place in Texas, the border problems. As an immigration lawyer, is there lots of legal action over there in Texas, or is there pretty much settled law where you don't have that many challenging cases in court?
Well, I think you've got, of course, the deferred action and the deferred action for parental accountability, the DACA and the DAPA that were filed down in South Texas and Brownsville, which is now in the Fifth Circuit. You definitely see Texas as a bastion of that counter-immigration culture. You got a governor who is adamant about maintaining, a certain position with respect to immigration. So, if any state in the union is going to make attempt at denying access to the refugees, it'll probably definitely be one in Texas that's going to be needed to be fought most likely in the courts.
Got one or two more questions for you, Eric. Can you hang on just a second while we take a little pause? I want to tell our listeners we're talking with Eric Cedillo. He's an immigration attorney, lives over in Dallas, Texas, does immigration work all over the country. His website is cedillolaw.com, and you can find that website on my website, which is jimbrown.usa.com. We'll come back and talk a little bit more immigration law, something that has jumped very much on the front burner with what's happening in the Middle East, now Syrian refugees entering this country. How far do United States citizens want to go? We'll talk about that and other issues. Again, my website, www.jimbrown.usa.com.
Welcome back to Jim Brown's Common Sense. Now, here's your host and professor of Thinkology, Jim Brown.
Glad you're joining us on the Common Sense Show. We're talking about this mass immigration or evacuation that's taking place out of the Middle East. Some of those who evacuated caused the damage in Paris, which brings home the fact we're taking in Syrian refugees. There's been several Syrian refugees identified who came in with passports, came in legally into France, and then were participating in the terrible mayhem and killing that took place. What role do we play here in the United States in terms of what allowing immigration? Eric Cedillo is my guest. He's an immigration attorney in Dallas, Texas. His website's on my website at JimBrownUSA.com. We're trying to explore this whole immigration issue. Eric, immigration used to be pretty much locked into the East Coast and maybe West Coast areas when there was immigration problems, immigration law. Then it developed to be along the Texas border. But now it seems like there are immigration issues all over the country, and I guess it's because of the flow of new citizens or new immigrants coming in and going all over the country. I guess it's there are any number of legal issues involving immigration authority, whether you're here legally or not, that take place throughout this country. Do you network with other lawyers and share ideas and cases, that kind of thing, all over the country? Eric, you still there?
Yes, I am.
You what now?
Can you hear me?
Okay, good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure can.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Absolutely. It is a federal, just like we're talking about with respect to the refugees, it is a federal immigration policy that we're dealing with. So, practicing in any state, the same immigration laws are going to apply, throughout the states.
I don't know how long you've been practicing, but it seems like, say, in the last 15, 20 years, primarily because of the wave of immigration in from the southern border, we have a prolifera or a large number of immigrants that operate. And, someone asked me, well, how do we find these illegal immigrants? And I said, well, if you live where I live in Louisiana, just walk through your neighborhood and see who's putting new roofs on the buildings and houses. Look who's mowing your grass. Look who's taking care of babies up and down the street, walking the babies up and down the street. And you've got a whole influx of immigrants, many who do not speak English and often are here illegally. Is there an acceptance level? I don't know how long you've been practicing, but say if you go back 20 years, it just strikes me that there was not this whole wave going on, and there was not that many questions. The immigration issues weren't that complicated and pervasive as they are today. Is that a fair evaluation or not?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons for that, Jim, quite honestly. I've been practicing for about 20 years, and quite honestly, 10, 15 years ago, I don't think it was that big an issue. There is no doubt that some businesses, small businesses, medium-sized businesses are certainly taking advantage of the ability to depress wages in a certain way with respect to who they hire. So that's always been a situation. Actually, the border, Texas border with Mexico, it's always been through NAFTA and other situations, it's always been a relatively porous border in terms of, getting relatively cheap labor over to assist with the economy. I think it's just been highlighted, over the last few years in terms of making immigration an issue of fearfulness, of course, tying it in with the potential for, terrorist activity and being able to cross the border, unchecked. So I think this is why this is such a scary proposition that the refugee folks from Syria coming over and the fear that is automatically, I think, induced by the thought of that. So I think it's been relatively stable in terms of what you see and who's here. It's been relatively consistent. It's just a situation where I think it's been highlighted a bit more in terms of making immigration more of a hot button issue. Certainly politics comes into play with respect to that as well. So, I think it's always been the way it's been. It's just a little bit more highlighted these days.
What if someone is here illegally, but they've been here, let's assume a family's been here for 30, 40 years, and they've got kids, and one of them gets into a situation where they're about to be deported. Can you make a case there? We hear so many instances of families that are here, and that's one of the problems being raised by those proponents of having some kind of a forgiveness situation that we're splitting up families. Do you represent families in a case like that who are to try to keep certain members from being deported? Is that something that's an active part of an immigration lawyer's practice?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are those situations I was referring earlier to deferred action for childhood arrivals, things of that nature. That is something that prosecutorial discretion with respect to immigration plays a major role. If it's before an actual judge, an immigration judge, you're making the case for why an individual might stay. You would be dealing with the government in terms of exercising that prosecutorial discretion. Those facts that play on behalf of the immigrant are, of course, shown to the other side. Someone's got stability, family. There's lots of kids who didn't even realize that they weren't citizens. They grow up in the situation, are brought here when they're toddlers, and it isn't until they make application to college and realize they're not going to receive the benefit of financial aid or something to that effect when they realize they don't have Social Security numbers or they're not here legally. So it's a situation where, quite honestly, there's a whole lot of individuals who are truly contributing to our society, and we need to make those distinctions. We need to realize that they truly are a part of our economy and should be separated from, the fear-mongering that is going on in terms of, people coming over here who have really bad intentions, which, there's no doubt that those folks exist.
I guess, though, it's going to be pretty hard to follow Donald Trump's suggestion to round up 11 million illegals and ship them out of the country. But I do think there is a reasonable person's attitude that, look, certainly we want immigrants. We want immigrants to come in, but we've got to have some legal process. We just can't let people sneak across the border. And in terms of balance, there are people from all over the world that want to come here that are doing it legally. They file their papers, they get in line, they do the things they're supposed to do to come in legally. They don't sneak across the border, so why are we giving preferences to those who break the law and do it illegally? And we may be stuck with those who are here now, but would you not agree that's a pretty reasonable response to say, look, immigration is the hallmark of America, but let's do it to where everybody has a chance, not just those who sneak across in a way that violates the law?
I would agree, Jim. I would agree to the extent that, the folks who are here, I just would suggest that it should be case by case in terms of what it is they've contributed, what it is they've done. But absolutely, we have an obligation, as a country to maintain our borders.
Eric, I've got to shut it down and move on. We're out of time. Sure glad to have you with us. Eric Cedillo is an immigration attorney over in Dallas, Texas. His website is on my website. You can find it at JimBrownUSA.com. Hey, Eric, thanks so much for your advice. Good information to us. Have a nice weekend. We hope to be able to talk to you again in the future.
It was a pleasure, sir.